Hey there, this is Andrew, and in this video I'm going to go over how to use pivot tables in both Excel and in Google Sheets. Um, the goal of a pivot table is to take data that hasn't been summarized and create summaries that help you answer some questions. So let's go through the steps to create a pivot table in Excel, and then we'll do the same thing in Google Sheets. So as it says here in this handout, and I'll leave a link to the handout in the description of this video so you can refer to it later. Before you start creating a pivot table, think about what questions you want to answer with the data and how it should be summarized to answer those questions. So let's take a look at the data we have right now. And the first step to create a pivot table in Excel is to put your data in Excel. And it should be in a format that has one row for each entry, meaning that it hasn't been summarized yet. So here's an example. This is some fake data I put together of name of participants, their age, their gender, the date that was recorded, what team they're involved with, and what they were doing on that date. If they had a payment, what it was, and what a test score was. So we can see that this student, Connor, he came in on 9/21 and he registered for football. Anne Marie registered on the same date for volleyball, but didn't pay a registration fee. So these were all the things that happened on that date. And then looks like we've got some attendance records for each of the sports too, and some more payments that came in. So Anne Marie ended up paying her registration fee on 9/26, 5 days later. And so we've just got some entries here and then for attendance, and then we have some post-test results. So let's first think about what question we might want to answer. One question, which we could say is how much money has each program collected in registration fees? That would be one quick question that we could ask, and it would be pretty simple to calculate by hand because we just have a few entries. But if you imagine a larger data set with hundreds of entries, it would be a lot more cumbersome to figure out. This is where we can start using a pivot table to answer this question. So if we know that the question we want to answer is how much money did each program, each team collect in registration fees, we can go on to the next step. Once we put data in Excel, make sure a cell in your data is selected and go to the data ribbon and click pivot table to create an automatic pivot table. Now, as I go through this step, my version of Excel will probably look different from your version of Excel, but there are still a lot of similarities. So no matter the version of your Excel, as long as it's newer than like 2010, you should see some ribbons up top, even if they don't look exactly like this, and there should be one called data. So I've got a cell selected in my data, and I can click this pivot table, or I can even click this down arrow and say create automatic pivot table, either one, and it's going to create a basic pivot table, and it even gives you a little step to learn more about it and what to do next. I'm going to close out of this for right now. And you can see it already selected a couple of things that we might want to look at. On which date, so this is for each date in our data set, how many times did each person attend, looks like. Or how many times was their name mentioned. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that's doing there. But either way, that's not the information we want to look for. So I'm going to deselect the two that were automatically selected for me. And oh, test score. It was showing when they took tests, on which date they took tests. I'm going to deselect all three of those data points. Now we got an empty pivot table, but it's all ready to go. This is based on the data that we were looking at right here. It created a new sheet and a blank pivot table. So we were interested in learning about, for each team, how much money did they collect in registration fees. So I'm going to go ahead and drag team over to the column label. Oh, I didn't grab it right. I grabbed it and I'm dragging it over to the column labels area. And I'm going to drop it right there. Oh, you know what? Column labels are up here. Actually, you know what? I'd rather have it be down on the rows. So I'm going to drag it over onto the row labels. So we can just move them around, and you can see it moved it from the columns to the rows. And so here I have my 3 teams. Now I can also drag something like if I wanted to see, well, we'll get to that next. So I wanted to know how much money was collected for each team. So the payment is the column where we recorded the money that was received. So I'm going to take the payment field and I'm going to drag it to the values. And right here it says it's showing us the count. And we can expand this a little bit to see what it's saying. Count of payment. It's counting how many payments, but not adding up the total. So I don't want to count how many times people paid. I want to count, or I want to add or sum. There we go. Sum all of the payments for each team. So I'm going to go in here. I click the little I for more information, and I'm going to change it from counting to adding the payments together. And I'll click OK. And now we can see here, football, 125, soccer, 45, volleyball, 40. This is how much money we collected from each team, and this is how much money we collected across all teams. And we can do a quick check. Let's see soccer. Let's make sure that adds up. So $45 from the soccer team. Here we've got soccer. One person paid 15. Another person paid 15. That's 30. And another person paid 15, that's 45. So there's the $45 for the soccer team. It all adds up. So that was a really quick and easy way to summarize. Having trouble grabbing onto my tab here. There we go. That was a quick way to summarize how much money was collected for each team. We can also add rows up here on top. What if I wanted to know, for whatever reason, how much money was collected from each gender? I could drag gender over into the column labels. And if we center these values, it's a little easier to see. We can see that we collected $55 from females and $155 from males for these teams. So we can split it up and say we got $15 from female soccer players and $30 from male soccer players, and so on. So this helps us if we want to look at different kind of combinations of summaries. But maybe we don't need to look at gender for that. I can just drag this back here, or I can deselect it. What might be another thing we would want to look at? Well, let's think about what if we wanted to see test scores for each of the sports. So maybe we could take the payments away. We don't need to look at payments, and let's just look at test scores for each team. And here again, we're counting test scores. So I'm going to change that, and I want to know the average test score. The average test score for each of the teams. And then maybe I even want to look at the pre and post test scores. So I'm going to split this up by activity. So here we've got, on the attendance entries, we didn't have any test scores entered, but on the post-test and on the registration entries, we did. So on the registration, we had them take a test, and on the post-test, we had them take a test. So we can see that football started at an average of 87.6 and moved up to an average of 89.6. We moved from 85.3 to 87.3 and 94.5 to 96. We had positive growth on all three. So this is a way that you can kind of look at all the different ways to combine averaging, counting, and categorizing all of the data that we have. So this is really the power of pivot tables, is just by dragging and clicking, you can get this information. It's also why it's important to know beforehand what you're going to be looking for, so that you're not just aimlessly seeing what you can produce. Instead, you're specifically answering a question that you had, and you had an idea of what you wanted to look for. Okay, that's everything about how to create a pivot table. So we unclicked the pre-selected column headers, and we selected the headers that we wanted listed in the rows area. We selected the headers we wanted on the top of the pivot table, and we dragged the data you want summarized to the values area. We did all three of those things when we selected the team for here on the rows, the activity for here on the columns, and then the test score for here in the values. And then we chose the type of summary we wanted to apply to the values when we changed it from a count to a sum or a count to an average. So when we wanted to average the test scores, we chose average, and when we wanted to sum the payments, we clicked sum the payments. And so here's just an overview of how we were doing that. We dragged, in this case, we're looking at each student and how many records were recorded. How many times did we have attendance recorded? How many post-tests and how many registrations did we have recorded? And so here we drag the name down to the row labels, the activity to the column labels, and then we had the count of activities, sorry. We drag the activity down to the values to count the number of times that they were entered in each activity. So that's how this works in Excel. A bonus tip here is that you can create a filter by dragging a header to that area, and it will allow you to only view the summaries for data that meets that criterion. So the way a filter works, it goes up, it gets added up here in the report filter. Say we wanted to look at, let's see, let's look at gender payments. There we go. So I want to know the total sum of all the payments by gender. So here we got female 55, male 155. But I want to filter it by the team that they are on. So I can add team to the report filter here up top, and it shows up top, and I can select just the team I want to look at. So say I just wanted to look at football, then we've only got male data here. But if I wanted to select soccer, then we've got $15 for females and $30 for males. So you can add a filter to look at data specifically. And if you want to edit the fields again, you just put your cursor in here, and this shows up again. Okay, so that's how it's done for Excel. Let's briefly look at how you would do it in Google Sheets. And in Google Sheets, we'll go for the same kind of data they have here. We've got student names and how many times they're recorded for each activity. So put your data in Google Sheets, make sure a cell in your data is selected, and go to the data menu, and click Pivot Table to create an automatic pivot table. So I'm going to go to, I've got the data here in Sheets. I've got my cursor in there, and I'm going to go to Data, Pivot Table here. And here it creates a blank pivot table. This is looking pretty familiar. For rows, I'm going to put the students' names here in the rows. So add field name. And then for the columns up here at top, I'm going to do the activity. And then for the values, I want to count the number of times each activity was recorded for each student. So I'm going to do activity again. And here it's adding together sum, but I don't want to sum them. I don't want to add them together. I want to do count. And I did count A because I just want to count the number of times that the activity was recorded at all, showed up at all. Count A just counts any non-blank cell. So here I've got Anne-Marie was counted for 2 attendance, 1 post-test, and 1 registration for a total of 4 times. And that's the same for all the students. And then we can do the same thing in terms of a filter. If I wanted to just filter by team, I could click show just football. And those are the students that are in football. So that is how you would do the same kind of thing in Google Sheets. So hopefully this gave you a sense of how you can use pivot tables to summarize data, especially if you have a large amount of data, really easily and quickly, and apply different averages or adding or counting to those summaries. And you can mix and match categories for how you look at that data. If you have further questions, I encourage you to Google it. There are a lot of tutorials like this one, and a lot of help available online for doing pivot tables. Even going to the help feature in Excel can be really useful sometimes. So if you click help and then search pivot table, you can open that topic Oh, that just shows you where it is. Help topics, here we go. Create a pivot table. Then it'll come up as long as you're connected to the internet, or maybe it's built in, and it'll walk you step by step through the same procedures, just writing rather than visual. So a lot of resources are out there. I encourage you to look them up as you start using this tool to help you with your analysis.